Thank you so much for attending my PowerPoint presentation about how I would make Dota better. In every Dota 2 player's life, there comes a moment where they think to themselves, man, if I were in charge of this game, I would make it so much better than it already is. And 99% of the time, they would be completely incorrect, because no one individual is capable of managing or further developing a game as expansive as Dota. But I'm happy to say that I actually happen to be in the 1% where all of my opinions are completely correct, and you can check out my tier lists if you don't believe me. For that reason, I thought it would be fun to theorycraft a couple of changes that I personally would make to Dota, the results of which, if they are ever implemented, I am 100% not responsible for. And the first of those changes would be to rework every single talent tree in the entire game. Of all the mechanics that have been added to Dota in order to expand it, such as Aghanim shards or the facet system, talents to me feel by far the most underbaked. For the vast majority of heroes, you're picking the exact same talent tree order every single game, regardless of situation, build, or matchup, which is why I propose reworking almost all of them to be much more like Shadow Fiend or Lina. If you look at the talent tree for those characters, there is a very clear divide between two different styles to play them. If you're playing Shadow Fiend and you're going the magic build, you pick the magic talents, and if you're going as the physical build, you pick the physical ones. The same is true for Lina, who can decide between being an actually useful instant burst kill mid laner or a boof-ass Wind Ranger who dies in 2 right clicks. Now the obvious counterpoint to this that you've probably already thought of is the fact that these heroes are very privileged, having 2 completely different builds that they can go depending on the game. But you would be remiss, because Dota actually already has a system that encourages this kind of playstyle for every single hero, and that is the facets. Aside from the handful of recently reworked or added heroes that don't have them, every single hero has facets that push them in one of 2 different directions. Instead of providing a consistent series of bonuses, Valve could instead rely on players picking their facet depending on the enemy or their allied lineup, and then using the talent tree to further cement what kind of playstyle they want their hero to have. A hero like Witch Doctor could have one half of his talent tree entirely dedicated to buffing the shit out of his already broken ultimate, and the other half could be dedicated to healing his team with Voodoo Restoration. Shadow Shaman could pick between focusing on unit target lockdown or his insane split push game with his ulti. And in the offlane, the Mars player could pick between speccing out his W to deliver an ungodly amount of burst physical damage or upgrading Arena in order to put his opponents in the cock crusher. Now of course, reworking the talent tree in order to reinforce the facet system could result in players picking the superior options every single game, but even if so, that's no different than what we already have. Now my second idea, and hear me out on this one, is to buff the map. Now it's no secret that power creep has massively changed the way that Dota is played in the year 2026, and most of those buffs have been focused on heroes, the jungle, and objectives like Roshan and Tormentor. But strangely enough, the map itself and its passive components such as towers and creep waves have gone mostly unnoticed by Valve Senpai. My suggestion is to help bring the rest of the game up to the same power creep that everything else has experienced by buffing creeps and towers, but in more interesting ways than just making their attack and HP pools bigger. One idea I have for this is giving creeps a sort of rally mechanic, similar to what the skeletons from the Dark Troll Summoner have. There could even be a defensive component to this, such as Flagbearer creeps stacking their auras and buffing their creeps with a form of armor or maybe even bonus HP. This would make shoving waves out both more difficult and more rewarding, and it would be even easier to take objectives after a one-team fight. We all know that players below 4k MMR need a little bit of help with that very basic idea. More powerful creep waves could also result in heroes spending much more time being visible in a lane fighting against them, which would promote smoke gang strategies and taking objectives even if you only have a single man advantage. And in the laning phase, creeps hitting harder would reward more tactical trading of XP and mana using spells rather than right clicks, which hopefully means that Mirana 5 right-clicking the position 3 all game will no longer be a thing. Real quick, if you'd like to hear some more of my absolutely insane ideas, this month for Patreon, I'm going to be giving a lecture on the Queen of Pain vs Shadow Fiend matchup. If you sign up at the $10 tier, you'll be able to see it as soon as it goes live. You'll be able to watch my videos without those pesky YouTube ads, and if you sign up for the high tiers, you can get custom audio recordings, handwritten letters, and even a replay review of your own match. Link is in the description below if you'd like to check it out, and if you're already a patron, thank you very much for your continued support. Now here's one that the position 5 players of the world are really going to love, which is buffing the hell out of the small camps. Now this is a fairly general statement, but let's be real here, we're all just talking about the kobolds, because that camp is an absolute nightmare to see when you need to get off the single pull so your carry doesn't kill themselves trying to get 2 melee creeps in front of the enemy offlane tower. Notably, this is the only small camp that does not have access to any form of piercing damage, which is the reason that small camps are able to tear down creeps but are still easy enough for heroes to farm. The obvious solution is to give them all piercing damage, but I think we also need to buff up the little kobolds in order to help them tank creeps for a little bit longer. Notably, I think that the disarm on the kobold warrior should probably stay, not because it's necessarily impactful or an interesting tech option for Chen, but because that shit is funny. I think other small buffs to HP and damage on the other camps could also be a good idea in order to make single pulling a little bit more impactful, but a more important issue is that I think both camps should become effectively unblockable. Near the dire pole camp on the right side above the high ground, there's a tree that you can cut that lets you put down a sentry that makes the entirety of the camp completely visible under true sight. If you can beg your position 1 to use their quelling blade on that tree and establish a sentry there, it becomes effectively impossible for the opponent to ever block it for more than a minute. In my opinion, Radiant should also have a very similar spot to this, which helps secure the pole camp and makes the safe lane just a little bit safer. There are still ways to interact with it, such as body blocking, but that would require a position 4 to use about half the IQ of their Pos 5 counterpart and create a laning stage checklist for them to follow to the letter. We all know that that shit will never happen, which is why I also think we need to change an aggro rule in order to deter pulls from both sides of the lane. Under the current rule set, if an enemy creep wave is attacking a neutral camp and you A-click an enemy hero like you would in the lane, the enemy creep wave will aggro to you, but the neutral camp will come with them. That sustained aggro makes it effectively impossible to decouple a creep wave from a neutral camp, but I propose that we change it so that the neutral camp will immediately lose aggro whenever the creeps do. This would allow all 4 heroes in the lane to interact with the pulling system in a way that goes beyond wards and body blocking, and I think it would promote interaction in the lane on both sides. What I'm getting at is that the safety of the safe lane should not derive from the heroes that typically lane there and the power of their spells and stats, but instead from the construction of the lane itself as it relates to the map. And as one final request, at this point, I think we ought to give the first creep wave spawns in the side lanes phased movement. In pubs and pro matches alike, players have begun body blocking the enemy creep wave in order to force them to meet under the safe lane tier 1 tower. Fun fact, when Valve first changed the aggro rules for the first creep wave, I started doing that as a joke to make my friends laugh, and it fills me with immense sadness to now see it become the meta. Now all of the changes in the previous slide are related to the side lanes, but don't worry position 2 players, I haven't forgotten about you. Because my next suggestion is to make mid actually feel like mid. Between all the pull mechanics and the various grinder lanes, it's not uncommon to have a pretty solid laning phase as a position 2, only to glance at the enemy carry and notice that they're pretty much the same level as you. That's always a disappointing feeling, because it means that ganking them is going to be very difficult unless you're one of those mid laners with an incredibly broken ultimate power spike. My solution to fix this is to add a considerably higher amount of XP to the lane, and probably some gold with it, and there's a variety of ways that we could do this. The first is to reintegrate an experiment that Valve tried, everyone seemed to like, and then Valve removed again for no reason. That solution is re-adding the small camp to the mid lane, though likely relocating it in order to make it easier to both stack and protect. Not only did this change add a ton of golden XP to the mid lane, but it also encouraged certain mid picks, ones with AoE clear and a tempo-based game plan. When you picked these heroes, even if you had a rough matchup and a difficult time ganking the side lanes, you were still able to use the small camp in order to secure a level advantage over the enemy side laners. Not only did this help you with lanes where you actually got outskilled, which, let's be honest, never happens, but it also was an indirect nerf to a variety of cheese heroes like Huskar and OD who were unable to farm the camp very effectively. The other idea I have was adding an additional range creep to every mid lane spawn, but I have a feeling that this would turn position 4 players into helicopter parents, and we don't want that. The general idea behind re-implementing the small camp is it would give mid laners an alternative way to convert their HP and mana into golden XP, encouraging traditional mid laners who tend to go bottle for regen, and discouraging cheese picks, though still giving them a place in the meta. But since Valve already tried this and decided to remove it for no good reason, I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for it. Speaking of removed mechanics, I wrote a little bit about Valve's general unwillingness to backtrack changes. Feel free to read it if you like. And finally, a change that I want most is relatively easy to implement and has nothing to do with the actual gameplay of Dota: fixing the role queue system. Despite trepidation upon it first being added to the game, the vast majority of ranked Dota grinders are very thankful for the role queue system, and we can't even imagine going back to the old ways. If you don't believe me, queue up for Classic Ranked and see how far that gets you. But aside from changing the desired roles to Pos 5 and 3 and having the rewards upon losing a game while riding the role queue express, it has been relatively unchanged. My first proposal is increasing the number of tokens earned by winning or losing a role rainbow game. It's currently set at 4-2, so I say we buff it up to 5-3 and see how that goes, potentially adjusting it later on. I also think that there should be alternative ways of earning role queue tokens, which I mentioned as a joke in a previous video, but I've now come to unironically believe. That joke was being able to trade in 1000 conduct score if you're above 10,000 in order to get 10 role queue tokens. The idea behind this is that it would give players with a very high behavior score incentive to remain on their best behavior by allowing them to trade in their good boy points for role queue games instead of saying the N-word. Tokens could also be given out as rewards for the coaching system that the vast majority of Dota players have completely forgotten about, and maybe if you complete a few Overwatch cases, you can get one as a little treat. And as one more alternative, they can open up role selection to allow you to queue for one high and one low demand role at the same time and earn a role queue token if you get the low demand one. This would encourage players to pick two roles and learn them both at the most competent degree they possibly can for the MMR that they're at, such as position 2 and 5 or position 1 and 3. Then, when they inevitably get queued into their low demand role several times in a row, they can flip the tokens they've earned into playing the high demand role. Now, the obvious problem with increasing all of the role queue tokens available to players is longer queue times, but if it means that I get fewer position 4 weavers on my team, I will gladly make that sacrifice. In conclusion, Dota is a developmental game, and you should absolutely play it. Since IceFrog has been semi-confirmed to be devoting his time to Deadlock's development, we can now finally confirm that the true IceFrog is 40 different Valve developers all wearing a trench coat. That's probably where they got the inspiration for Meepo's Aghanim Scepter. Peace on planet Earth.